Morning, everybody, and welcome on into your FreightWaves Community Spotlight for this Thursday morning. I'm Kaylee Nix. We've got Thomas Wasson here on the hot mic, ready to talk about loaded and rolling, one of the most hype spaces in the freight community. Thomas, is that correct?
We bring the hype, we bring the energy, we load it up on trucks, and we're delivering great content.
And delivering it on time every single Tuesday and Thursday right here on FreightWaves
Most
TV.
of the time.
Most of the time. Thomas, let's dig into today's topic. We've got quite the tongue twister going on here. The CTPAT, Customs Trade Partnership Against Terrorism. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Well, it's not CPAP, so don't even get that confused. I did, so I just wanted to throw it out there. But CTPAT is it's one of those things where we're talking about cross-border movements. Primarily, it was created with preventing, terrorism, movement of weapons, and bad things. But especially in terms of nearshoring, it's very important because there's challenges to visibility. Now, your average person thinks to themselves, what do you mean, Thomas? Every time I listen to FreightWaves, I hear about freight tech and visibility. Well, yes, for domestic carriers in the United States whose ELDs are accessible and have to use logbooks and everything through the ELD. And Mexico, they're a little more skeptical. Not only are there security concerns, but they use electronic logs, but are not. Their mandate and how the ELD and hours of service works is completely different. Through my interview recently, half of Mexico's priority in terms of trucking is get it there as fast as possible with as few stops, because depending upon the road you're at, you may get shook down.
Mm-hmm. Thomas, talk a little bit about how this can go hand in hand with the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement. Is that something that we see working jointly together, just both to promote trade, but also to prevent that terrorism aspect?
Well, yes. The biggest thing first is knowledge is power, as the early 60s cartoons would say. And there's a bug on the table there. Don't worry about that. But when we're looking at it, this is the first step is making sure that shippers and carriers, it's not just a carrier thing. That's the first thing we gotta. I thought at first it was just for carriers. Well, it turns out it's end to end. Everyone is agreeing that we're going to actually inspect the stuff and do a better job, because what'll happen is people will slip extra pallets. They will make sure they'll forge the documents. And so this is really one of those first steps in terms of a seal of approval or legitness. Think of it like your wine. I know this is a little bit of an off-topic thing, but it's a very topic also near and dear to my heart. You have areas and regions. So let's look at Italy, DOC and DOCG, which basically means you are in fact legit. The thing in your bottle, the grapes that you use, can be traced to a village, a location, a domain. And then if you have DOCG, it's like you can knock on the person's door and say, hey, I know this is you. Well, think of CTPAT like the wine version of these legitness. It's the seal of legitness for trucking. It says, this is a carrier that has met all the criteria. I know their drivers. I know this information is in fact correct. This is a shipper who does all the checks end to end, so we can actually trace throughout the supply chain that this product has not been tampered with. And it does take a lot of effort. I talked with John Sutton at Sunset Transportation, and he said that, it almost felt like it reminded me of getting a security clearance. He went through hundreds of pages of questionnaires. And so it's not just something for the faint of heart, but as nearshoring intensifies, you want that seal of legitness because you can get better quality.
And then once you have it, it's something that stays with you and you get more people to trust you in your business operations. For folks who want to watch that episode, go find it up on YouTube at Loaded and Rolling. Of course, it's coming out Tuesday afternoons right here on FreightWaves TV. Thomas, let's move on to some more topics going on in the enterprise space right now. Rumor has it there might be a little bit of sign of life in the freight markets. Is that correct?
There is. Who would have thought that we'd be excited for a sign of seasonality? But recent data from ACT Research, as well as FreightWaves data, has corroborated that what has happened post-road check. I get excited because in trucking, road check is one of those big bellwethers. It's like the Kentucky Derby of spot rates. We want to see how things are going. So the good news is that we have a seasonal bump. Now, it's not a big one in context, but it is something we can predict. So what that tells us is that while the market has not swung up, it is further proof that we are nearing the crappy down cycle where things have not yet swung up. It's the first sign of a market event having an impact, because over the past year and a half, things just kept getting worse despite the things that should technically make it bump.
So, Thomas, we're headed into the summer months. I know one of your favorite sayings is the summer doldrums of trucking. Is that something that we're needing to be paying attention to this year as well? Or is the market still just so down in the dumps so we don't necessarily need to worry about that summer seasonality taking us offline?
Down in the dumps for dry van. We'll talk about segment. Segment is key, by the way, because a lot of people like to think of the overall market. Well, yes, for the dry van, it's still very competitive, but for reefer, this was one of the more positive notes. Reefer is moving back up. We're seeing volatility in the reefer market. Produce season is in full swing in the early, we're in produce season now. June is when it really starts, like May's the ramp up. June, it starts taking off. Very positive signs for reefer. Spot rates and outbound tender rejection index has moved up side by side. It is a smaller segment, so therefore it is more volatile. And so you pump more volume in, rejection rates go up. Additionally, flatbed and open deck as another segment that has been doing well, but it could be better. And yes, it is. Outbound tender rejection rates were over 20% last time I checked. FTI, which is the ticker for flatbed all-in spot market rates, is also high and elevated. It is up in the single digits cent per mile. So we are seeing good signs of life in those two segments. The only challenge is for those of you in the dry van segment, you are slumming it up still. There's just too many of y'all.
There you go. And you mentioned road check week. Obviously, we saw a little bit of bump or change in that with the markets because of that and due to seasonality. When it comes to the actual road check week itself, how long until we have that data about what was found and what carriers and drivers can do to improve and make sure that they don't get stopped next road check week?
It generally takes them about 6 to 8 months. You'll see the press releases in terms of the total amount of out of service inspections, how many were placed out of service, the percentages. The CVSA likes to do that. This year it was for airlines and alcohol, DOT, drug and alcohol clearance and everything. I had somebody ask me on the X platform, though, what does it really mean? Because, yeah, this is a spot market event. If you're a contracted carrier and you're good at your job, you're not just going to take a week off because you probably suck and you can't even get contract freight in the first place. So let's just make sure that we get this straight, the facts straight. Spot market activity is always impacted by DOT week, but at the same time, the contract market keeps chugging along. What do we need to watch, dear listener? That's the key. We want to pay attention to see if this spot rate rally is sustained, or is this what the stock people call the dead cat bounce?
There you go. And you want to watch that not only in the data, but also on Loaded and Rolling with Thomas Wasson. So, Thomas, you mentioned John Sutton coming up on your show. That was this past week. What about next week? Who do we have?
Next week, wild card week. I have a few folks I'm waiting to reply back to email, but usually we like to reserve the last week for the sponsor, but the sponsor, they came early in early May. So if you want to reach out, hit me up, Thomas Wasson 7 at Twitter or twasson at freightwaves.com. Shoot me an email. Your face may be the next one on Loaded and Rolling. That's right, folks. I'm looking for guests. I only do one once a week. Spots are limited. Call now while supplies last.
Or send an email. I think he responds better to emails. And one last thing before we let you go, Thomas, this upcoming weekend is, of course, Memorial Day weekend. Are we looking, or should we be looking for a holiday blip in any of our market indicators following this weekend?
Yes, completely. What we want to see is movement. We want to see volatility. Memorial Day, and then we're going to have the 4th of July. We do see a lot of it. The big questions that remain is that will this upward trend continue upwards into Memorial Day, or will everyone showing back up to work depress spot market rates? We want to look at spot market activity because it does lead the overall contract market between 30 and 90 days. So early signs in the highly volatile data in the front end will eventually lead to better things on the back end.
All right, Thomas. Well, we will talk to you next week after that Memorial Day weekend holiday. We'll see what went up, what went down, and what changed around. Go catch Loaded and Rolling Tuesday afternoons right here on FreightWaves TV, or find those replays up on YouTube. Subscribe to the newsletter as well. We'll see you next week.